Hey, everybody, it's Natalie Bensavenga, and welcome to another edition of Facts Over Fear. Now, I'm really excited about today's show because, in particular, this has been an issue that I have been thinking about a lot lately, and I'm so happy to chat with an expert, Katie Paul, who is the director of the Tech Transparency Project. And we're going to be breaking this down. And what I'm referring to is gambling, online gambling. I know I've been seeing a ton more ads everywhere, it seems, in the digital spaces. It was all over the Super Bowl ads, and it's kind of concerning. And for years, it's been interesting because Meta Platforms in particular has insisted that it's just a neutral platform, a place where other companies are building apps and connecting with users. But there's a new investigation that is suggesting something that's very different. According to a reporting from the Tech Transparency Project, Facebook is helping fuel a booming ecosystem of free to play, and we're going to talk about that, casino games that critics say operate a lot like gambling, except with far fewer rules. In some cases, the financial damage is staggering. And I mean staggering. One player says that he lost more than $220,000 chasing virtual chips in casino style games on Facebook that advertise themselves as free. I don't even understand how that works, so we're going to dig into that. The investigation also showed how Meta helps these apps reach new users through its powerful ad system, allows developers to target potential players and keep them hooked. And when people eventually do spend real money, Meta takes about 30% of those purchases. So what's even more troubling about this is some of the games being promoted through Facebook's advertising ecosystem have already been banned or declared illegal in multiple United States. Yet they continue to circulate around the platform's major networks. And so there's a lot of questions being raised here that we're going to be talking about around the modern internet economy. When platforms profit from systems designed to keep people spending, are they really just hosting the activity, or are they part of the business model itself? And I'm hoping we can get some clarity on that. Joining me now is Katie Paul, the director of Tech Transparency Project, which conducted this investigation. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to just go big picture before we dig into some of the investigative pieces here. I feel like we're at the end of a certain stage of late stage capitalism where we are now talking about extraction. Like it's almost like there's nothing left to make or consume. And so this feels like there's just this extraction of whatever money is left and it's being funneled into these large companies. When you're looking at that from a tech perspective, what are you seeing in terms of what it looks like as an ecosystem from your perspective?
Well, I think we have to remember that when it comes to big tech, they're also extracting a resource, and that is data and your attention. And these platforms have been designed to maximize that, and your attention is valuable, and so is your data because it allows them to run targeted ads, which is really the bread and butter of the business model for all of these big tech companies. For instance, even Google, people mainly know as a search engine, but their biggest piece of their revenue is from advertising. That's the kind of thing that many people don't understand when they're engaging on these apps is everything you see, even if it seems odd and you just want to click more, it's all designed to do that, to keep your eyeballs on the screen.
I think that's what really concerns me about this is the addictive nature of this issue because you're taking something like gambling, which is inherently addictive anyway, and then you're adding in all of these things that we've basically learned from video games for years, is how to keep people engaged in a game. So you're trying to enact certain things in the brain from that level of addiction. Plus, now we're looking at the gambling itself. And I want to talk a little bit now about Facebook in particular, because this investigation suggested that Facebook isn't just hosting these casino style games, like I mentioned, but that it's actually helping them grow. So, what did you find out about how Meta's platform and advertising tools actually work to drive traffic to these apps? And do you think that Meta is overstepping its bounds in terms of, host neutrality?
I mean, one of the things we have to think about in terms of just looking at Facebook, the Facebook piece of Meta, which used to be Facebook Inc., we have to think about all of the features. It's really tried to be the everything app. You can do payments, you shopping, you do communications, and they've created a gaming section. And within that, there's actually a specific tab called casinos.
Hmm.
And that's one of the ways that they're hosting these apps. Now, I think the games that you play within the platform, one of the things it's also important to keep in mind looking at our report is that many of the developers aren't even in the US. And so the platform is kind of serving as this way for them to subvert gambling laws in many states. Um, and to push these apps to people, you or I may not just hop into the Facebook gaming section and look for these, but the ads are going to come across our screen whether we like them or not. So these developers that create the games are then able to use Facebook's advertising tools to push this content to people that would be most susceptible to it based on all of the data that Facebook has collected on you. And that's one of the ways that you see this entire ecosystem. Facebook's not just hosting them, they're taking money for the ads, which push people more of them, which incentivize the gaming company to push um, more engagement. So there's a lot of things that we see at play here. And that's, excuse me, that's part of Meta's broader ecosystem of how it keeps the everything app, makes it so that it's profiting from everything at the same time.
If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bensvenga. I'm chatting with Katie Paul, Director of Tech Transparency Project. And we're talking about exactly this, how Facebook seems to have its hands, Meta seems to have its hands in everything. And speaking to that point, I mentioned that Meta is reportedly taking 30%, which that's a big chunk, Katie, of the in-app purchases. So, how important is that revenue stream to its platforms at this level, and how does it create then a structural incentive to keep these games thriving on the platform? I mean, 30%. I was like, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's 30% just by way of the payments taking place on the platform. Again, payments are one of the everythings that the company has baked in. But that's actually not unusual when you look at some of these companies. So, for instance, Google and Apple both take a cut of every purchase you make in an app or a subscription that you subscribe to for an app. For these entities to be able to access the reach of these major tech platforms, that's essentially the fee of doing business. And it's beneficial for the gaming companies because they're able to purchase this unmatched reach all over the world. 3 billion people are on Facebook specifically. So that's something that you wouldn't get with traditional advertising. And then at the same time, the companies are able to find new ways to subvert certain laws by having, kind of latching on to the wild west of lack of regulation we see for big tech in the US right now.
I'm so glad you brought that into focus because Wild West is always, that's the phrase I use when I talk about tech, because there doesn't seem to be not just, there's not really a lot of regulation, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of political will to regulate, or on the flip side of that, a lot of education around why this would need to be put into policy and therefore regulated. Can you talk about more specifically that from a policy perspective, why there seems to be such a lag? Because we're at the same time we're building all of these data centers, we're being told AI, AI, AI. We're having all of these issues now with these meta platforms and in the ways that they're, like you said, subverting laws. How far of a lag behind the laws do you see in terms of the tech itself?
Well, the law that governs the way that tech is able to kind of operate with freedom from any sort of liability, Section 230, that law is 30 years old as of this year.
Oh, God.
And that is older than many of the companies that have been using it to get away with being a publisher hosting third party content and therefore not responsible for that content. But at the same time, when we look at just the advertising piece, for instance, on Meta, the company explicitly reviews and approves ads before they run. It knows what the ad is and it's reviewing and approving that and taking the money. And we've seen them do this with a whole host of harmful things. Drug trafficking ads on Meta's platform, hundreds of them. Weapons trafficking ads. Really, there's no end. We know that the company has made billions from scams based on Reuters reporting from their own internal documents. So the company is using this freedom from liability to massively profit while promoting harm. Scam ads, for instance, in any other circumstance would be considered fraud. Um, when we look at some of these gambling things, again, in other circumstances, different laws would be governing these, but the companies and the developers are kind of taking advantage of this who's responsible, it hasn't been laid out yet, and profiting while harming people in the process. And, you mentioned the addiction issue earlier, and I think it's important to keep in mind Meta is on trial right now for the way it's designed its platform to be addictive for children. Meta and Google both are. Snap and TikTok were also supposed to be part of that case, but settled before the trial. And the trial's been pretty shocking. And while that is based on an MDL that's focused on harms to children, those same addictive technologies apply to all of us. And that while it's harming children, it's everybody that's being harmed by those tweaks that they've done to make the platforms more addictive. So you really have this self-fulfilling cycle that is thriving off of this lack of regulation. And we do see rare bipartisan support for
Mhm,
this change,
mhm.
but there's not a enough of a threshold of it in Congress. These tech companies are out lobbying big oil and big tobacco in terms of what they're spending, and so there's a much more significant influence from tech companies like Meta that are now moving into AI. We still haven't managed the social media aspect of this yet. And so there's a lot of regulation that needs to happen. Some states have started trying to enact things at the state level, and the companies are also lobbying heavily at the state level to avoid that. So you see how the influence is not just in our lives; it's in government. These companies really have a significant role, um, and we're all kind of suffering the consequences.
And suffering that consequences can also mean literally financially as well. One player that was highlighted said that he lost, and this was just such a staggering number to me, and it just broke my heart on so many levels. He lost more than $220,000 chasing virtual chips. I mean, when you're talking about what you just said around this idea of addiction, how are these games then designed to keep people spending? Because like I said, I think they've learned a lot from the video game space where those games have they've learned that if we let people get far enough, but then we make sure to kill them or bring them into a big boss round, they're most likely to get frustrated at a certain point, or they'll invest in the game and buy things to work around. And I feel like there's a lot of overlap here between some of these casino games and the things that they've learned from the video game world. But when you hear that number, $220,000, can you talk a little bit about the specific things that are being done to exploit people's weaknesses in that moment? That's so much money, Katie.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to consider is that when it comes to video games, you're buying those things without any expectation that you're going to get money back. That you're not going to win money if you get to the final round. You're buying enhancements, and you know that that's what that is. With
Mm,
these games, because they are in a casino section on Facebook's gaming, people go in with the expectation that spending money and winning means that potentially you could make money, but you're spending that money and you can never win money back.
mm,
And that's something that is not clear at the outset when these are being advertised as casinos. They take advantage of these niche areas they call themselves sweepstakes casinos, and take advantage of the law by saying, well, because you're not gambling with real money, you're not gambling at all.
mm,
And people are paying real money to buy the coins to gamble, and then not actually being able to get that money back. When it comes to the addiction aspect, there's even more things that we've seen. For instance, some of the developers, CEOs, when describing the platforms, one of the things they said is that because they aren't legally considered gambling, they can tweak the outcomes more. They can fiddle with it to make it more addictive, maybe get you think you're winning and then right at the end, you know, drop it off. They're able to change the outcome in a way that would be completely illegal in any casino in the world. But we don't see that happening with these games because despite being advertised on Meta's own gaming section as casinos, if that's how you find them, you cannot actually win the money back.
See, I'm really glad you clarified that because I didn't know that. Even just listening to you now, I was also under the impression that they were a casino. So what you're saying, just to clarify, is people are spending money to get virtual chips, and then they're playing those virtual chips. And even if they win, let's say $1,000 in virtual chips, they're not Meta's not paying them $1,000.
Correct.
Wow.
That $1,000 is not
Oh my
leaving
god.
that game.
Oh
So
my
that
god.
$220,000 is not leaving that game. And,
Oh,
there's a lot of terms and conditions that try to put the onus on users here, but it's clear that they're being misled even just by the way that these are organized. So I think that these are part of the, where we see the pitfalls of how Section 230 has been applied in this kind of free for all. We can do whatever we want, there's no repercussions. Companies have operated and profited handsomely that way for many years. But what we're seeing is that that's applying to things that are illegal in every industry. Why is it that this can be a major profit driver for a company like Meta and these developers, but you wouldn't be able to do those same things in casinos in Vegas? Is that um, permissible for this industry to get away with it, but the industry that's actually built on gambling and following those laws is not? You could say the same thing with regard to scams and fraud. A credit card company would never be able to, engage in scams and fraud. Banks have to follow the Bank Secrecy Act. And yet we see Meta making $16 billion a year from ads that it knows are scams. And instead, in that case, even when it's identified advertisers as running scam ads, the
yeah.
Reuters report, which again was based on Meta's own internal documents that were leaked, said that those advertisers were instead just charged more rather than removed from the platform. And this is research we found in this area as well. So it just goes to show how little effort is put into their primary product, which is advertising.
Yeah.
And that is something that we really need to see regulators step up about.
If you're just joining us, I'm Natalie Bencavanga. This is Facts Over Fear, and I'm with Katie Paul, director of the Tech Transparency Project. Katie, I'm just so grateful that you're taking time to chat with me about this because there is just a lot of noise happening right now in the world, and there are a lot of terrible things happening all around us. But these are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having because I don't think people understand how far reaching a lot of this is in there and how it's impacting them and how the lack of accountability, the lack of government oversight, the lack of regulation on businesses like Meta that are just behemoths, is creating so much harm to communities. Now, let's get back to the illegal part here for a minute because your report found that some of the games that have been advertised through Facebook have been banned or at least ruled illegal in multiple states. So, two questions. How did they come to that conclusion that they decided that they were going to ban them? And then, how are those apps still able to reach users through Meta's advertising ecosystem?
Well, when you look at these type of games, there's certainly pressure from, again, the commissions for legal gambling in these different states to regulate these type of games in the same way that they're regulated. Obviously, these states are not passing Section 230 reform to do this. Instead, they're targeting these games and making sweepstakes casinos illegal for operation in their state. Now, when we see Meta advertising for these games, because they are not transparent about all of the ads in their Meta ad library, we're unable to see if they are allowing these ads to run for users in states where these games are banned.
Mm.
We don't know if the company is making some sort of geofencing effort to make sure that these games are not accessible to users in different states. History would show that's likely not the case. They probably are not doing that, but we have no way to confirm that. And that's the kind of thing where we're seeing these tweaks to other things. But the problem with that is, while this is helpful at the state level, and we see more states like Virginia that are looking at laws about this year, the mechanism that makes it possible and puts it in place, which is Meta and the lack of accountability on those issues, is not changing. And that's where we're going to see new iterations of these types of harms all the time. Unfortunately, we're seeing this with how AI is being applied to different things like the, involuntary, non consensual notification apps. But this is the kind of thing where we need to really target the ones that are profiting the most significantly from it. And it's clear it's these big tech companies that own the entire ecosystem to uphold these types of sweepstakes games on social platforms.
Um, you had mentioned in the beginning, we were talking about sort of targeting people in particular, and developers can use Facebook ad tools to identify likely spenders. When we talk about how powerful these tools are when it comes to finding and retaining high value players, can you discuss a little bit about the impact of that? Because once again, I don't think people understand, like you said, our data is like the new currency and they're tracking every single thing, and not trying to get our tinfoil hats out or anything like that, but just the reality that if you're online, if you have an online footprint, you're being tracked. If you are using, public spaces, there's surveillance everywhere. There's just a lot of ways for companies to keep tabs on you. Can you talk a little bit about how that's all impacting the sort of the potential for high value players, and what are they looking for? What are they trying to exploit in certain people?
Right. So these advertising tools, not just for developers, but for anybody that uses them, are incredibly powerful. I mean, that's why we saw the investigation into the 2016 election interference by Russia, which that entire Senate investigation really focused on the use of social media to target specific American communities with specific narratives. That's why we have the ad library now. It was an effort to stave off regulation because these companies' advertising tools that were very powerful were being used for influence purposes. And now we see how they can be used for corporate purposes, but really incredibly specific niches. And the company has largely automated this process, so there's very little oversight into how it's applied. I'll
Mhm.
give you an example. Several years ago, we did a report wanting to test how meta advertisements could be pushed to teenagers, so people that are minors on the platform, ages 13 to 17. At the time, you could actually target teenagers for interests. And the interests available that Meta was tracking included like pharmaceutical sites like drugs.com, interests in gambling was one of them. So you could actually target people not legally of age to gamble with gambling ads based on Meta's ad tools. So
Hmm.
we submitted these ads, Meta reviewed and approved them. And we obviously canceled the ones that we created so they wouldn't run. But Meta repeatedly approved ads targeting kids for harmful content like gambling, despite the fact that that is illegal, despite the fact that their own policies say that that's not something that you can do. And we ran that test again. Meta's solution to this at the time was okay, well, for kids, you can't target them for interests. You can just target age and location. Okay, so we ran the test again, but now you're just targeting a larger swath of kids for the same
Yes.
ads, and they still got approved.
Wow.
We even did a test last year testing it using Meta's own AI tool to develop the images for the ads, and it approved the ads within less than a minute. Again, targeting kids. And this is for ads like gambling, for things that are supposed to be restricted from minors. So it's just one little slice of the bigger issue we see with how these companies are not operating in good faith and actually profiting from illegal activity. And really not attempting to address it if they address it until after the fact or after they've been caught in the public.
Katie, I just so appreciate you just breaking all of this down. And as we wrap up, I just have a couple of more thoughts based off of what you just said then. Okay, this feels a little little upsetting, right? This is like it's like I'm a little worked up hearing all of this because this just feels so predatory. It feels so exploitive. It just feels sinister and dirty, right? I mean, what would meaningful accountability actually look like then for companies like Meta, like these large tech companies to actually have to play by the rules? And how would that be enforced? Who would oversee that?
Well, that's the multi-billion dollar question, right? Uh, when we look at other industries that really operated in regulatory gray areas for a long time historically, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of people compare big tech to big tobacco
Uh,
because of the addictive qualities. But the difference with these is we have to rely on big tech every day for our lives, for our jobs, for communicating with our family. And people didn't have to access cigarettes. So it's more critical infrastructure than it is, something that's just being pushed that's addictive. And when we look at it in that frame, I think it's better to compare it to the EPA, for instance.
mhm.
Prior to the Environmental Protection Agency, big companies after the industrial revolution and 100 years of smog in the atmosphere, people's water was being polluted, critical things that they need to survive and live during the day every day. Those were regulated, and the Environmental Protection Agency was put in place to make sure that companies were not dumping sewage into your drinking water and making sure that there weren't chemicals burning in the air. These are the types of things that really, because of the fact that we all rely on tech for communications, the government relies on tech.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we need to see a more cohesive regulation than just hoping they operate in good faith to comply with a bill that's passed. The companies at this point have made very clear that they are you know, not going to operate responsibly. So I think it's up to Congress to address this themselves. It's pretty clear the American public is, and the global public is getting wise to how harmful some of this content can be and how little control they have over it, despite relying on it for payments, for paying bills, for contacting their kids after school.
Yeah.
So I think that these are the types of things that we need Congress to take a good hard look at. And it really isn't a partisan issue because it affects all of us regardless of party.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to add this too. Tech has been shoved down our throats. Like even just like this right now. This is really cool that we have the opportunity to connect with people like this and I can do these interviews with anyone from all over the world. I super appreciate that. But the reality is I wasn't asked if that was technology I would like. It was just there's all these iterations that keep occurring that then are being fed to the public. I mean, this idea around if you want to apply for a job, you have to go online. If you want, it's getting harder to not use credit cards to pay for things. Everything has moved online to pay bills, pay portals. So there's this weird double-edged sword where we have everything is supposed to be online because it's somehow more accessible. But then there's huge swaths of our population that don't have readily or easily access to the internet, to broadband. And then at the same time, it's not being treated as a utility. It's still being treated as a luxury in its price point. So, like your conversation, I don't mean to go off on all these places, but it just raises like all of these interconnected questions around what we've been told we need to use. And then at the same time, it's harming us when we use it. And so it's creating this very bizarre web. And so that's why I'd love to have you back because we really just scratched the surface, I think, on so many things that we've touched on tonight. And I feel like I've learned so much. I think my audience has too as well. But I like to end my show. I like to be solutions driven in my work. What are some calls to action if people are like, this is outrageous? I need to be able to do something, make my voice heard. What do you recommend people do if they want to get involved with this?
Call your senators, call your representatives. Don't just do it at the federal level, do it at the state level, and make clear that you want to see these platforms regulated in a way that keeps us safe. If we're going to have to rely on them every day, we should be able to ensure our own safety on them. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do right now. So Definitely call your representatives and congressmen and voice your opinion because this isn't a partisan issue, it's an everybody issue.
Amen to that. And I just want to say thanks to our audience here that's been listening and leaving comments, including M. Hope, who said, "This is just horrible. Such deceitful policies. It should be criminal, tricking people into gambling without any chance to win back their money." I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think that's very true. Katie, if people want to learn more about the work that you do, the important work that you do, can you please share with us how we can connect?
Yeah, you can go to our website, techtransparencyproject.org. And we don't just focus on issues with platforms. We look at how these companies have influence in our government, how children are being harmed. Really, we have a lot of education resources for people to understand what's really happening behind the screen.
I really appreciate Katie. Thank you so much for joining me for today's Facts Over Fear. And as always, everyone, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you again.